The chainsaw roared to life in Sheriff Corinne's hands as she cut straight through the fire trail access road. Sparks flew from the asphalt while flames crept closer to the houses behind her. My Skycrane helicopter hovered overhead with 6,000 gallons of fire retardant, ready to save those homes. But Corinne looked up at me through her aviator sunglasses and shouted into her radio. Any aircraft that enters this airspace will be shot down as a terrorist threat. That was when I realized this woman was completely insane. My name is Marcus Chen, and I have been flying wildfire suppression helicopters for 15 years. Every morning starts the same way at Regional Fire Station 47. Coffee at 5:30, weather briefing at 6, equipment check by 6:15. On this particular Tuesday in August, the air was crisp and clear, perfect flying conditions. I walked around my Skycrane helicopter, checking every bolt and cable. This machine was my partner in fighting fires across 3 counties. She could carry 6,000 gallons of fire retardant and drop it with surgical precision. In the right hands, she could stop a wildfire before it consumed entire neighborhoods. The emergency call came in at 7:42 that morning. Brush fire reported near Millfield Township. Initial reports showed rapidly spreading flames threatening residential areas. Standard protocol called for immediate aerial suppression combined with ground crew containment efforts. I reviewed the satellite maps while my crew loaded the retardant. The fire zone had excellent access roads and established fire trails. These trails served as natural fire breaks and provided safe landing zones for emergency vehicles. Everything looked straightforward for a quick suppression operation. "Ground crews are already en route," radioed Fire Command. "You are cleared for immediate departure." Within minutes, we were airborne and heading toward the smoke plume visible on the horizon. I felt that familiar surge of purpose that came with every emergency call. Somewhere ahead, people needed help. Property was at risk. Lives might be in danger. This was exactly why I became a pilot. The flight took 12 minutes. As we approached the fire zone, I could see orange flames spreading through dry brush toward a cluster of homes. Ground crews had already established a perimeter, but the fire was moving faster than they could contain it. This was exactly the type of situation where aerial drops made the difference between controlled suppression and total disaster. I radioed the incident commander to coordinate our approach. That was when everything went wrong. "All aircraft are ordered to remain clear of this area immediately." The voice on the radio was sharp and commanding. I did not recognize the call signature, but the tone was unmistakably authoritative. I circled the fire zone at a safe distance while trying to establish communication with ground command. "This is Skycrane 7 requesting clearance for retardant drop. We have homes at immediate risk." "Negative. I am Sheriff Corinne Martinez, and I am in command of this emergency scene. All aircraft will remain grounded until further notice." I could see her on the ground below, a short woman in a crisp sheriff uniform, pointing up at my helicopter while shouting orders to everyone around her. She had positioned herself directly in the middle of the established fire trail, blocking access for ground vehicles and creating chaos among the response teams. "Sheriff, this is standard wildfire protocol. Aerial suppression is critical for containing this fire before it reaches residential structures." "I do not care about your protocols, pilot. My department is handling this situation with ground crews only. You are ordered to return to base immediately." The frustration hit me like a physical blow. I could see the fire spreading toward houses while my helicopter carried enough retardant to stop it completely. Every minute of delay meant more danger for the families in those homes. But Sheriff Karen was not interested in firefighting effectiveness. She was making a point about who was in charge. "Ma'am, I need to respectfully explain that federal emergency protocols give aerial firefighting operations priority in situations like this. Are you arguing with a direct order from law enforcement?" Her voice turned cold and threatening. Through my binoculars, I watched her motion to two deputies standing nearby. They walked toward the fire crews and began ordering them to step back from their containment work. "If you do not comply immediately, I will have you arrested the moment you land. And if you attempt to drop anything on this fire without my authorization, I will consider it an assault on law enforcement personnel." I hovered there in disbelief. Sheriff Karen was threatening to arrest me for trying to put out a fire. She had no understanding of wildfire suppression, no training in aerial operations, and no business commanding an emergency scene. But she had a badge and an ego, and that combination was about to cost people their homes. The radio crackled with confused voices from ground crews asking for clarification. Fire Command was trying to establish authority, but Karen kept overriding their communications with threats and demands for compliance. Meanwhile, the fire continued to spread. I watched helplessly as flames jumped the first containment line. The orange glow reflected off my cockpit window like a warning. Those houses were running out of time, and I was sitting in the sky with the solution to their problem. But Sheriff Karen had decided that her authority mattered more than their safety. The next hour was the most frustrating of my entire career. I maintained position overhead while Sheriff Karen orchestrated what could only be described as a public relations disaster. Instead of coordinating firefighting efforts, she had positioned herself for maximum visibility with the local news crews that had arrived on scene. "Sheriff Martinez, can you tell us about your response strategy?" "We have this situation completely under control. My ground teams are using proven containment methods that do not require dangerous aerial operations over populated areas." I watched her give this interview while orange flames licked closer to houses behind her. The irony was staggering. She was claiming safety concerns about aerial drops while allowing the fire to approach homes that could have been protected with a single retardant deployment. My radio crackled with increasingly desperate communications from ground crews. They were requesting air support every few minutes, only to be denied by Karen's command center. The frustration in their voices mirrored my own growing anger. "We need those drops on the south flank. The fire is moving faster than we can cut line." "Request denied. Continue with ground suppression only." "Ma'am, we are about to lose the Martinez property. Air support could save that house." "I said ground suppression only. Follow orders." The first house caught fire at 11:37. I recorded the exact time in my flight log because I knew this moment would be investigated later. The Martinez family home, ironically sharing a surname with the sheriff who refused to save it, began burning from the roof down. I had 6,000 gallons of fire retardant sitting, unused in my helicopter, while I watched a family home become engulfed in flames. The helplessness was overwhelming. Every instinct I had developed over 15 years of firefighting screamed at me to act, but Karen's threats of arrest kept me grounded. My co-pilot Jake turned to me with disgust in his voice. "This is insane, Marcus. We could have stopped this." "I know, keep recording everything. Audio, video, radio communications, all of it." Sheriff Karen continued her media interviews while the house burned behind her. She never once looked over her shoulder at the destruction her orders had caused. She was too busy explaining to reporters how her cautious approach was protecting public safety. The smoke was getting thicker. Ground crews were falling back as the fire gained momentum. Radio chatter revealed that 2 more homes were now in immediate danger. I gripped the controls and made a decision that would change everything. That night, I could not sleep. The image of the burning house kept replaying in my mind. I knew that home could have been saved. More importantly, I knew that other homes were still at risk if this fire continued to spread unchecked. Sheriff Karen's ego-driven obstruction was going to cost people everything they owned. I spent hours researching federal emergency protocols and aviation authority regulations. What I discovered gave me hope. Under the Federal Emergency Management Act, wildfire suppression operations fall under federal jurisdiction during declared emergencies. Local law enforcement can coordinate with these operations, but they cannot override federal aviation authority in emergency situations. At 6 the next morning, I contacted Regional Fire Command directly. Fire Chief Robert Hayes had 23 years of experience and no patience for political interference with emergency operations. Marcus, I have been trying to work with Sheriff Martinez, but she refuses to acknowledge federal authority over this incident. The fire has grown to 400 acres overnight. Chief, I need written confirmation that you are authorizing aerial suppression operations under federal emergency protocols. You have it. This fire is threatening an entire neighborhood now. We cannot wait for local politics to sort themselves out. Armed with federal authorization, I returned to the fire zone that morning. Sheriff Karen was already there, having spent the night setting up what looked like a small command post complete with media area and refreshment station. She had turned the emergency into her personal publicity event. I radioed her directly. Sheriff Martinez, I am operating under federal emergency authority. Fire Command has authorized immediate aerial suppression operations. I do not recognize any federal authority over my jurisdiction. You are still ordered to remain clear of this area. Ma'am, federal emergency protocols supersede local authority during declared emergencies. I am required to proceed with suppression operations. Her response revealed the depth of her delusion. If you enter this airspace, you will be committing an act of terrorism against local law enforcement. I have authorization to use any means necessary to stop you. That was when I realized Sheriff Karen was not just wrong about her authority. She was dangerous. The combination of unchecked power and complete ignorance of emergency protocols had created a situation where she would rather see homes burn than admit she was not in control. I coordinated with ground crews through encrypted channels that Karen could not monitor. We developed a plan for synchronized suppression that would maximize effectiveness while minimizing her ability to interfere. The key was creating a new fire break, using precision helicopter drops in locations she could not block with her vehicles. Marcus, we are ready on the ground. The wind is shifting in our favor. If you can hit the north flank with retardant, we can finish containment from the south. Everything was in place. Federal authority was confirmed. Ground crews were positioned. The helicopter was fully loaded and ready. All that remained was executing the plan despite Sheriff Karen's threats. But Karen had one more card to play. At 10:15 that morning, Sheriff Karen committed what I can only describe as an act of sabotage against public safety. I watched from above as she directed her deputies to physically destroy the main fire trail access road using chainsaws and a small bulldozer they had commandeered from the county road department. The sound of the chainsaw cutting through asphalt was audible even from my altitude. Sparks flew as the blade bit into the road surface, creating a trench that would prevent fire trucks from reaching critical positions. She was literally destroying emergency infrastructure to maintain her authority over the scene. "All units be advised," I radioed to Fire Command. "Local law enforcement is actively sabotaging fire suppression infrastructure. Recommend immediate federal intervention." "Understood, Skycrane 7. You are authorized to proceed with emergency suppression operations immediately. Local interference is now considered obstruction of federal emergency response." The authorization I had been waiting for finally came through. No more negotiations. No more political games. Federal authority was superseding local obstruction, and I had 6,000 gallons of fire retardant ready to deploy. I began my approach run while Corinne screamed threats through her radio. "I am ordering all personnel to consider that aircraft hostile. Take whatever action is necessary to prevent terrorist attack on law enforcement." The threat was clear, but so was my duty. Houses were burning. People needed help, and I had the training and equipment to provide that help despite her interference. This was the moment when 15 years of emergency response experience crystallized into pure professional focus. The approach required precise coordination between altitude, airspeed, and release timing. Too high and the retardant would scatter uselessly. Too low and the helicopter would be damaged by heat and debris. The wind conditions had to be calculated perfectly to ensure the drop hit its intended targets. Beginning retardant deployment in 3, 2, 1. The helicopter shuddered as 6,000 gallons of red fire retardant released from the belly tank. I watched it spread across the fire line like a crimson blanket, smothering flames that had been advancing toward homes for 2 days. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Orange fire turned to white smoke as the retardant did its job. From the ground, Sheriff Corinne was screaming into her radio about unauthorized attacks and federal overreach. But her voice was drowned out by the cheers from ground crews who could finally see progress in their battle against the fire. "Direct hit, Skycrane 7. Fire suppression is working. We can contain this now." The satisfaction was overwhelming. After 2 days of frustration and watching preventable destruction, I had finally been able to do my job. The fire that had threatened dozens of homes was now contained. The retardant drop had created the firebreak that ground crews needed to complete their suppression work. Sheriff Corinne stood in the middle of her destroyed fire trail, pointing at my helicopter while shouting orders that no one was following anymore. Her authority had evaporated the moment federal operations took precedence over her local power trip. The fire was contained within 4 hours. The contrast between Sheriff Corinne's claims and reality became apparent within hours of the successful fire suppression. While she prepared for another round of media interviews, the story was already changing based on witness accounts and documented evidence of her interference. "Sheriff Martinez, how do you respond to claims that you prevented aerial firefighting operations?" "Those claims are completely false. My department coordinated all suppression efforts according to established protocols. The success of this operation proves that our ground-based approach was the correct strategy." I watched this interview from the fire station later that evening. Corinne was standing in front of a backdrop of successfully protected homes, taking credit for the very outcome she had tried to prevent. The audacity was stunning, but it was about to backfire spectacularly. Jake had been recording everything during our 2 days on scene. Video footage clearly showed Corinne blocking fire trails, threatening arrest of firefighting personnel, and ultimately destroying emergency infrastructure with chainsaws. The contrast between her public statements and her documented actions was undeniable. Ground crew testimonies began emerging within hours. Fire Captain Rodriguez gave a detailed account to local media about Karen's interference with standard suppression protocols. His 20-year career gave him credibility that Karen could not dismiss. "I have never seen anything like this. Sheriff Martinez prevented us from doing our jobs for 2 days. Homes burned that could have been saved. This was not law enforcement. This was obstruction of emergency services." The radio recordings were particularly damaging. Every threat Karen had made was documented on official emergency channels. Her statements about shooting down aircraft and treating firefighters as terrorists were now public record. The legal implications were becoming clear to everyone except Karen herself. More importantly, the community was starting to ask questions. Residents whose homes had been threatened wanted to know why aerial suppression had been delayed. Property owners were demanding accountability for the damage that could have been prevented. The political cost of Karen's power trip was mounting. Local news crews began investigating the timeline of events. They discovered that federal authorization for aerial operations had been granted 12 hours before the successful suppression, but Karen had continued blocking access anyway. Her claims about safety and protocol were contradicted by federal emergency management officials. Aerial wildfire suppression is standard protocol in situations like this, explained Regional Emergency Coordinator Sarah Williams. Local law enforcement typically assists with ground coordination, but they do not have authority to override federal aviation operations during declared emergencies. The technical aspects of Karen's errors were becoming public knowledge. She had not just been wrong about her authority. She had been catastrophically wrong about firefighting itself. Her interference had endangered lives and property while serving no legitimate law enforcement purpose. By the end of the week, 3 separate investigations had been announced. Federal Emergency Management wanted to review local interference with their operations. The state fire marshal was investigating failures in interagency coordination, and the county district attorney was examining possible criminal charges related to obstruction of emergency services. Sheriff Karen's 15 minutes of fame were becoming a nightmare of accountability. The federal investigation moved quickly. Within 2 weeks, I was sitting in a conference room with investigators from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, providing detailed testimony about Karen's interference with wildfire suppression operations. "Mr. Chen, can you describe the specific actions that prevented you from conducting aerial firefighting operations?" "Sheriff Martinez threatened to have me arrested if I entered the airspace. She claimed authority to shoot down my aircraft as a terrorist threat. She physically destroyed fire trail access roads to prevent ground crew coordination with aerial operations." The investigators took detailed notes while reviewing hours of radio recordings and video evidence. The pattern of obstruction was clear and documented. More importantly, the consequences were measurable. The delayed suppression had resulted in property damage that could have been prevented. Property owners were not waiting for federal action. Within days of the fire being contained, 3 separate lawsuits were filed against the sheriff's department. The Martinez family, whose home had burned while I sat overhead with retardant, were seeking damages for preventable property loss. Their attorney made the case in stark terms. Sheriff Martinez had no authority to prevent federal emergency operations. Her actions directly caused the destruction of my client's home. This was not law enforcement. This was criminal negligence. The legal momentum was building. State fire investigators concluded that standard aerial suppression protocols had been improperly blocked by local law enforcement. Their report specifically criticized Karen's lack of training in emergency management and her failure to coordinate with federal authorities. Criminal charges came next. The district attorney filed obstruction of emergency services charges against Karen personally. The evidence was overwhelming. Radio recordings proved she had threatened federal emergency personnel. Video showed her destroying emergency infrastructure. Witness testimony confirmed her pattern of interference with life-saving operations. Sheriff Martinez used her position to prevent emergency responders from protecting lives and property, announced District Attorney Michael Torres. This abuse of authority endangered an entire community. The political fallout was swift. County commissioners called for Karen's resignation. The State Sheriff's Association issued a statement distancing themselves from her actions. Local newspaper editorials demanded accountability and reform. But Karen remained defiant. She held a press conference claiming she was being persecuted for protecting public safety. Her version of events bore no resemblance to documented reality, but she seemed convinced of her own victimhood. I followed proper protocols to ensure public safety during a dangerous emergency situation. These politically motivated charges are an attack on local law enforcement authority. The disconnect between her claims and evidence was complete. She had convinced herself that threatening to shoot down firefighting aircraft was proper protocol. She believed that destroying emergency infrastructure was protecting public safety. The delusion was as dangerous as it was complete. Trial preparations revealed the full scope of her misconduct. Pattern evidence showed similar interference with other emergency operations throughout her tenure as sheriff. The wildfire incident was not an isolated case of poor judgment. It was part of a broader pattern of authority abuse that had endangered public safety for years. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified for 2 days about standard wildfire suppression protocols and the specific ways Karen's actions had endangered lives and property. The evidence was overwhelming, but the verdict was never in doubt. Sheriff Karen Martinez was convicted on 4 counts of obstruction of emergency services and sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. She lost her law enforcement certification permanently. More importantly, she lost her re-election bid by the largest margin in county history. The new sheriff, Captain Rodriguez from the fire department, implemented comprehensive emergency coordination protocols. Local law enforcement now trains annually with federal emergency agencies. Interagency communication has been streamlined to prevent the kind of territorial disputes that Karen created. The community recognition was gratifying, but not necessary. The county commissioners presented our flight crew with a public service award for persisting with life-saving operations despite law enforcement threats. Local media covered the ceremony, but the real reward was knowing that future emergencies would be handled properly. 3 years later, I still fly wildfire suppression missions across the region. The coordination between agencies is seamless now. Local law enforcement assists with crowd control and evacuation coordination while leaving firefighting to trained professionals. The system works when ego does not interfere with expertise. The Martinez family rebuilt their home with insurance settlements from the lawsuit. They invited me to the housewarming party, where they thanked me for trying to save their original house. The attempt had failed because of Karen's interference, but they appreciated the effort. Karen served 14 months of her sentence and was released on probation. She moved to another state and works in private security now. Her law enforcement career ended with criminal conviction and public disgrace. The community she claimed to protect ultimately rejected her completely. The broader lesson extends beyond one corrupt sheriff. Emergency response requires coordination between multiple agencies with different areas of expertise. When any single person tries to control operations outside their training and authority, people get hurt. Lives are endangered. Property is destroyed unnecessarily. Professional competence must be respected regardless of rank or political position. Firefighting protocols exist because they save lives. Aviation authority structures exist because they prevent disasters. Emergency management systems work when everyone stays in their lane and does their job. Sheriff Karen forgot that public service means serving the public, not serving your own ego. Her badge was supposed to protect people, not threaten the professionals trying to help them. The consequence of that forgotten duty was criminal conviction and the loss of everything she claimed to value. From my cockpit, the lesson is clear. Sometimes doing the right thing requires ignoring the wrong authority. Professional duty trumps political pressure when lives are at stake. And justice, like fire suppression, works best when applied quickly and precisely.